Hello everyone. I am back today with a new topic on contracts law, which is protecting clients' interests in contracts. Now, simply knowing where a particular clause would go and what would be its purport is material to contracts, but not essential. What is important is how these clauses are going to be used to protect your client's interests. Now, let us take a hypothetical situation. Now, ABC Private Limited, which has gone virtual due to the recent pandemic, required a set of laptops and dongles. It contracted with XYZ Private Limited to procure 100 laptops and dongles from them. Now, ABC Private Limited, which is the customer or the buyer of these laptops and dongles, comes to you, the lawyer, and asks you to review or vet the contract which ABC is going to enter into with XYZ. How would you review or vet the contract in such a way that it protects your client, ABC Private Limited, who is the buyer's interests? Now, I am going to discuss certain clauses. I mean, there could be more clauses because when you're going through a contract, you need to go through line by line, word by word, and check every single word. Now, as I cannot discuss all the clauses at once, I am going to pick up a few clauses and tell you how, in a particular clause, while reviewing, we see our client's interest is being protected or not, and how can we amend a particular clause to protect our client's interest. Now, there are some clauses which you should look at. So the first is payment terms and conditions. Then the buyer's obligations, which because your client here is a buyer, so you should look at the buyer's obligations. Now, indemnity and limitation of liability are extremely important as they would impose economic obligations upon your client. Therefore, you need to see if indemnity and limitation of liability adequately protect your client or not. Then confidentiality obligations is also something which you need to look at. Now, payment terms and conditions. The first thing which you should see here is whether the payment will be made in advance or in arrears. Now, you are the buyer's lawyer, and the buyer would definitely not want to pay the entire money in advance. And then maybe if there's a dispute regarding the delivery of the goods or the condition of the goods, then the buyer would not be able to retract all the amount from the seller. Therefore, they should make the payments not in advance, but in arrears. If the contract says the payment will be made in advance, you need to review that and change it back to the payment will be made in arrears. It could also be made in tranches, or maybe 10% payment after the first consignment comes in, maybe 10% after the second consignment comes in, etc. So that way the middle ground can be reached between the buyer as well as the seller. Now, what would be the mode of the payment? Now, this is something which you need to know because you should always choose that mode of payment which is the most suitable and comfortable to your client. As you are the buyer's lawyer and you are the one who is supposed to make the payment, the mode of payment should be something which is extremely convenient and comfortable to you. Now, how would the late or missed payments be handled? So, if the vendor's lawyer is there, they are definitely going to put in a clause which says that in case the payments are delayed, a particular percentage of penalty will be levied. Now, as the buyer's lawyer, what you need to do is firstly, totally refuse payment of any penalty. Try to come at a middle ground. Maybe, bide more time. For example, if, there's a delay of 3 months or 4 months, then maybe a very minimum amount of penalty would be paid. So you need to draft and structure this clause in such a way that your client's interests are protected. And as you are the buyer's lawyer, you need to ensure that your client is not required to pay any penalty in case of delayed or missed payments. Now, what would be the period within which the payment has to be made? So as the buyer's lawyer, your job is to make this period as wide as possible. So it could be 60 days after the goods have been delivered, or maybe 90 days after the goods have been delivered, etc. If you were the vendor's lawyer, your job would have been to make this period as narrow as possible. Now, whether the payment would be made in tranches or lump sum. This is something I discussed earlier, that, being the buyer's lawyer, you should always try to make it as a lump sum amount at the end after all the goods have been accepted in the prescribed condition. Now, buyer's obligations. So a lot of times what happens is, these are laptops and dongles, but a lot of times what happens is that supply of goods may require certain permits and approvals. Now, who is going to bear the cost of these permits and approvals? A buyer's lawyer needs to fix this cost on the vendor. And when you're drafting this particular clause, you should say the vendor would be responsible for any applicable extra costs, which are incurred in terms of permits and approvals, which are going to be obtained from the government. So it is your job to minimize as much economic liability on your client as possible. Now, change in the cost of product. For instance, the laptops right now are costing 20,000. What if, after the delivery of 20 laptops, the cost increases and becomes 40,000? And the vendor now wants to revise the price. So this is something which you need to take into account, and you need to say that if there is any change in cost of the product, the buyer is not liable to pay them. So, the buyer is proceeding on the assumption that the cost is going to remain fixed. So these are the things you need to take into account in order to protect your client's interests. Now, acceptance and condition of the product. So when you are accepting a particular product, especially in supply agreements, the condition should be laid down in the contract. The mode of acceptance should also be laid down in the contract. And it should be clearly written that only if the product is accepted, in the stated mode and in the prescribed condition, that the acceptance would be deemed complete. And it is only after the acceptance that the buyer is going to make the payment. So as the buyer's lawyer, it's important for you to see how the acceptance and the condition of product is going to protect your client's interest, and that your client is not cheated, that, a substandard product is delivered to them and they are called upon to pay for the same. So also, typically in these cases, you should also mention that if the condition of the product is not up to the mark, the same will be returned and no payment shall be made for the same. So these are few things which are going to protect your client's interest if you are the buyer's lawyer. You should also check for any other onerous obligation which may be imposed upon the buyer. And you should, specifically deny any such obligations. And when you are giving the final cut of the draft to your client, you should remove these onerous obligations from the contract. Also remember that your job does not end with contract drafting. You also have to go ahead and negotiate the contract so that it reaches its final stage. So whenever you are reviewing a contract, you should keep that in mind, and every change should have a rationale behind it. Now, indemnity. So as we all know, indemnity is something which arises from third-party claims. For example, if now XYZ is giving ABC the laptops. XYZ says it has 100 laptops. It is the owner of these 100 laptops. Now ABC takes these laptops from XYZ. Tomorrow, a third company comes and says XYZ did not own those laptops. They were my laptops and I had leased them to XYZ. And there was a specific prohibition in our contract that XYZ was not supposed to lease these contracts further. So XYZ is not the proprietor of these laptops, and he couldn't have sold them to you. And they are going to sue you, ABC, the buyer, for an illegal possession of their laptops. Now, what you, ABC's lawyer, can do in such cases? That's where the indemnity comes into picture. Now, indemnity should always be mutual. You should try to make it mutual, because there is no point negotiating in a one-sided indemnity, because both the sides are going to require this at some point or the other. Now, negotiations are not that simple. There are times when maybe you are representing a startup and the opposite party is maybe a multinational company. They maybe have more bargaining power. What are you going to do then? So you should always ensure that indemnity clause is not one-sided. And if it is one-sided, then certain exceptions are to be made to that. Or maybe the grounds of indemnity could be narrowed down so that your company or your client does not suffer a lot of harm. Now, conditions attached to indemnity. So typically, there are conditions which are attached to indemnity in order to dilute the effect of the same. For example, it would be said that, once an event triggering indemnity arises, the indemnified party, or the party who is supposed to be indemnified, is required to raise a request or send a notice to the indemnifying party within 7 days of the event. If they fail to do so, they lose all rights to indemnity. Now, such conditions are used to dilute the indemnity clause. So in case you are a small startup who is not able to negotiate a mutual indemnity clause, and you are the one who is supposed to indemnify the other party, you should always put in such conditionalities which are going to dilute the indemnity clause and give your client a leeway to escape. Now, grounds of indemnity. So indemnity can be claimed on certain specific grounds. One of the most broadest grounds which you can include is breach of applicable law. Now, similarly, breach of confidentiality or IPR obligations. So, or maybe loss of human life or injury, which is normally included if third-party personnel are leased out. So these are the things which you should include in an indemnity clause. Now, if you are the buyer, firstly, you should always negotiate for a mutual indemnity clause. Now, grounds of indemnity, you should keep, even if it's a mutual indemnity clause, keep the grounds of indemnity as narrow and as specific as possible. So do not put it like, breach of the terms of the contract. Now, that could be anything. So therefore, it would be a very broad ground available. So to the opposite party. Therefore, you should always, pinpoint to specific focused events which are going to trigger indemnity obligations. Now, limitation of liability. Again, limitation of liability could be one-sided or mutual. Now, if the opposite party is a big MNC and it says, no, only my liability is going to be limited. Now, that is something you need to negotiate hard on the table. There are a lot of times where, you will not be able to come to a ground where they agree, because they would be, much, much bigger than you in terms of money. So if it's a one-sided limitation of liability clause, then again, there are certain things which you need to keep in mind. However, you should always, fight for a mutual limitation of liability clause. Before I proceed, limitation of liability clause basically limits the liability of the parties. So it would say that in case there's any breach of contract, now my party would not be liable above this particular amount, and they would only be liable for direct damages. So things like that, where the parties limit their liability by putting in this particular clause. Now, what would be the value of this limitation? For example, you cannot write, if it's the value of the contract is 10,000 crores, you cannot say I cannot be held liable for more than 100 rupees, right? So it has to be reasonable, and that is something which you need to check and confirm, especially if it's a one-sided limitation of liability clause. Now, typically people put the value of the contract as the limitation, the quantum of amount to which the liability is limited. Now, typically indemnity is carved out from limitation of liability clauses. Now, indemnity is made an exception to limitation of liability because indemnity is a third-party claim, and there could be indirect damages too, which may be brought forth. Therefore, especially if it is a one-sided indemnity or a one-sided limitation of liability clause. So no one would want, that, for example, if between ABC and XYZ, there is a limitation of liability clause which protects only XYZ. Now, XYZ will not want that, the indemnity which they are being paid by ABC gets limited only to the value of the contract. They would want to realize as much as they can because it's a third-party claim, and the third party can sue them for anything. So therefore, they would want indemnity to be an exception to limitation of liability. So if you are ABC's lawyer in such a case, you should totally take a stand against it and make this totally not acceptable to you. Because if indemnity is accepted out of the limitation of liability clause, that can bring about huge liability and unforeseen liability to your client. So if it's a one-sided indemnity clause, if it's a one-sided limitation of liability clause, do not make indemnity an exception to the limitation of liability clause, as this is going to bring a huge economic liability to your client. Now, only direct damages are sought to be limited. And as Contracts Act also says, that no liability can be imposed for remote or consequential damages. So this is something you need to check, that the limitation of liability clause doesn't include indirect damages. It is only restricted to direct damages. So, and if you see a line which says that all damages are included, or the parties will be held responsible even for consequential damages, you need to remove that particular line. Now, confidentiality and IPR obligations. So when you are defining confidential information, you should make the definition as broad as possible. It should include both oral, written information, or any information which has been shared. Now, again, you should fight for a mutual confidentiality and IPR obligations. Before you do this, you need to also see that if any confidential information or any IPR is being exchanged here or not. For example, if XYZ sells laptops to ABC, and they say that as a part of the contract, I would also be giving my logo along with it, so that it would also advertise my brand. So in such case, maybe an IPR obligation would arise here. Now, limited exceptions if one-sided and it is in favor of your client. So if you are putting a confidentiality obligation, there could be certain exceptions to this confidentiality obligations. If the confidentiality clause is one-sided and it favors only your client, narrow down these exceptions. On the other hand, if they favor the other side, broaden these exceptions, so that your client's interest would get protected. Now, confidentiality clause should be applicable after the expiry of the contract as well, for a reasonable period of time. Typically 6 to 12 months is the post contract applicability of a confidentiality obligation. But what if it's a one-sided confidentiality clause and all the obligations are on your client, and due to the size difference between your the other party and you, maybe an MNC and you being a small startup, you're not able to negotiate to have a mutual confidentiality clause, or they argue that you are not sharing any confidential information, why do you want a mutual confidentiality clause? In such cases, you try to limit the applicability of confidential obligations post the expiry of contract to not more than 6 months. On the other hand, if it's mutual, a 6 to 12 month period window can be acceptable. So these are few clauses which you need to keep in mind when you are reviewing a contract, and you need to see how these particular clauses are affecting your client's interest. So, you need to know how you can protect your client's interests by amending and reviewing these particular clauses. So apply your brain when you are reviewing a particular contract and see how that particular clause can turn into an onerous obligation for your client. If you think it is turning into an onerous obligation for your client, amend the same and just remove it and then take it to the negotiating table. And because obviously if you are reviewing a contract and amending it to suit your client's needs, the vendor's lawyer would be doing the same. So the ultimate battle is going to be fought on the negotiation table after that. Hopefully you understood what I have been saying, and hopefully you understand how to protect your client's interest through this video. If the video was helpful to you, please do let me know. If you have any doubts, please message me on LinkedIn or leave a comment here. Thank you. Have a safe day. Stay safe. Stay home.